Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into the world of Vivek Ramaswamy.
Oh, yeah.
You might recognize him from the recent presidential race, but the sources you've provided, news articles, even a Wikipedia entry, suggest he might be setting his sights on a different political prize.
Okay.
The Ohio governorship in 2026.
Interesting.
We're here to unpack what this potential shift means, examining his past, his present, and what his next move might be.
It's a fascinating pivot, isn't it? From biotech entrepreneur to the national political stage, and now potentially back to his roots in Ohio.
Exactly. So let's start with the basics.
Okay.
Who is Vivek Ramaswamy beyond the headlines? The sources paint a picture of someone who's worn many hats. A biotech entrepreneur, an author, a former Republican presidential candidate.
Let's not forget a self-proclaimed anti-woke crusader, which has become a central part of his brand.
Right.
He's built a career and a considerable fortune estimated at nearly $1 billion on challenging what he sees as woke ideology in corporate America.
That's right, with the founding of Roivant Sciences in 2014 and then Strive Asset Management, his anti-woke investment firm.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to consider why he's chosen this particular hill to die on, so to speak.
Right.
Is it genuine conviction? A shrewd political strategy? Or perhaps a combination of both?
It's a question worth exploring, and it's particularly intriguing when you consider his background.
Yeah.
Born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio, to Indian immigrant parents, he brings a unique perspective to the table.
For sure.
How might his experience as the son of immigrants inform his anti-woke stance and his political ambitions?
It adds another layer of complexity to his story, for sure. And speaking of his political journey, it's been anything but conventional.
Right.
He jumps headfirst into the 2024 presidential race with no prior experience in elected office, which is a bold move for anyone, let alone someone who made his name in the world of biotech.
Absolutely. Declaring his candidacy back in February 2023 was a signal that he wasn't afraid to shake things up. And while he suspended his campaign in January 2024, after finishing fourth in the Iowa caucuses, he did secure a notable endorsement.
Yeah.
Donald Trump.
That endorsement is interesting for several reasons, don't you think? Not only did it solidify his connection to the Trump wing of the Republican Party,
Yeah.
but it also led to his current position co-leading the newly proposed Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, with Elon Musk.
Oh, wow.
Talk about an unlikely pairing.
It's a partnership that raises a lot of questions. What exactly is DOGE and what are its goals? Trump has called it potentially the Manhattan Project of our time, suggesting a radical overhaul of government operations.
Wow.
And with a planned $2 trillion in cuts to the federal budget, the potential impact is enormous.
$2 trillion. That's a staggering amount.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder which agencies will be targeted, what services might be cut, and what the ripple effects will be across the country.
Precisely. And let's not forget that Musk and Ramaswamy don't require Senate confirmation for their roles in DOGE, giving them significant leeway in how they operate.
Right.
Will they use this freedom to implement sweeping reforms, or will they face resistance from within the government itself?
It's a high-stakes game they're playing, and the outcome could have major implications for the future of the country.
But let's bring it back to Ohio for a moment.
Okay.
He's got this national profile now, but he's hinting at a return to his home state.
Right.
Why this sudden shift back to Ohio? What's drawing him to the governor's race in 2026?
Well, the timing is certainly opportune. Ohio's current governor, Mike DeWine, will be ineligible for re-election in 2026 due to term limits.
Right.
This leaves a wide-open field, and it seems Ramaswamy sees it as a chance to make a tangible impact on the state where he grew up.
And some Ohio voters seem receptive to the idea. One article even quoted him saying that Ohioans are pleading with him to run for governor.
That's quite a statement.
It is. It suggests that he believes his message resonates with a segment of the Ohio electorate. But it's still very early in the game.
Sure.
2026 is a long way off, and the political landscape can change dramatically in that time.
It definitely can. But to understand his potential appeal, we need to delve deeper into his past, particularly his business career.
Okay.
Because while he's presented as this anti-woke champion, some aspects of his business dealings paint a more nuanced picture.
Yes, there's a certain dissonance between his rhetoric and some of his actions. Take, for instance, his company Axivant and its attempt to market a drug called Intepridine for Alzheimer's disease.
Right.
It was a story of both soaring ambition and a spectacular fall from grace.
The story is captivating. They bought the patent for this drug for a mere $5 million. Then Axivant's initial public offering raised a whopping $315 million.
Wow.
The company's valuation skyrocketed to $3 billion, even though they only had 8 employees at the time.
8 employees, including his mother and brother. It was a gamble that captured the imagination of investors, but it ultimately failed. Interberdine didn't deliver in the clinical trial, and the company's value plummeted, leaving many investors wondering if it had all been hype and overpromising.
It certainly raises questions about his business practices and whether he's always been as successful as he claims. There are even accusations of using tax havens and avoiding negative outcomes for himself, while others bear the brunt of his risky ventures.
And it's not just the Interberdine story.
Right.
Critics point to other examples of potential hypocrisy. For example, his earlier venture, Roivant Social Ventures, actually supported diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, and environmental, social, and governance, ESG initiatives, the very things he now rails against.
So for those who might not be familiar with those terms, DEI essentially refers to policies and programs that promote the representation and participation of different groups of people within an organization or society. And ESG, on the other hand, focuses on incorporating environmental, social, and governance factors into investment decisions.
Yes, thank you for clarifying. And the criticism is that while Ramaswamy might be genuine in his anti-work beliefs, now his past actions suggest a willingness to embrace these initiatives when they were beneficial to his business interests. It creates this perception of opportunism rather than principled conviction.
It's a perception he'll need to address if he wants to convince Ohio voters that he's the real deal. But let's move beyond his business dealings and delve into his political views.
Okay.
He describes himself as anti-woke, a term that's become a rallying cry for a certain segment of the population. But what does it actually mean in terms of his specific positions and policies?
Well, he's been very vocal about his belief that the U.S. is facing a national identity crisis driven by what he calls new secular religions, like COVIDism, climatism, and gender ideology.
Right.
He argues that these ideologies are dividing the country and eroding traditional values.
That's a pretty provocative framing of the current cultural and political landscape.
It is.
And his specific policy positions reflect this anti-woke stance, don't they?
Absolutely. He's advocated for some pretty unconventional ideas like raising the voting age to 25, which he argues would promote more informed and responsible civic engagement. He's also opposed to affirmative action, believing that it perpetuates racial divisions rather than bridging them.
And he's a strong advocate for federal legalization of marijuana, which is an interesting stance for someone who's otherwise aligned with the more conservative wing of the Republican Party.
It is. It suggests that he's willing to break from the party line on certain issues which could appeal to voters who are tired of partisan gridlock. And of course, we can't forget his unwavering support for Trump, which he made very clear during his presidential run and continues to emphasize now. It's a connection that could both help and hinder him in Ohio, depending on how the political winds are blowing in 2026.
It's definitely a gamble. Aligning himself so closely with Trump could energize the Republican base, but it could also alienate moderate voters who are wary of Trump's divisive rhetoric and policies.
It's a tightrope walk for sure. And speaking of his connection to Trump, let's talk about DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency that Trump has tasked him and Elon Musk with leading.
Okay.
What are they hoping to achieve with this new entity?
Well, the stated goal is to find ways to cut the federal budget by a whopping $2 trillion. It sounds like a Herculean task.
It does.
And it makes you wonder if it's even achievable without causing significant disruption to government services.
It's an incredibly ambitious goal, and the details are still murky.
Yeah.
Which agencies will be targeted, what programs will be cut, and how will they ensure that essential services aren't jeopardized in the process?
It raises a lot of questions about their priorities and their understanding of the complexities of government.
And let's not forget that DOGE operates outside the traditional checks and balances of government.
Right.
Musk and Ramaswamy don't require Senate confirmation, giving them considerable autonomy in how they proceed. Will they use this freedom to implement bold reforms, or will their lack of accountability lead to reckless decision-making?
It's a situation that demands close scrutiny. But let's not lose sight of the fact that Ramaswamy has a history of attracting controversy both in his business dealings and his political life.
Yes, and some of those controversies raise serious questions about his judgment and his commitment to truth. Remember the incident with his Wikipedia page? Apparently, someone was paid to edit his biography before he announced his presidential candidacy.
Right. The edits removed references to his Soros Fellowship and his involvement with the COVID-19 response team. It looked a lot like he was trying to sanitize his past and distance himself from anything that might be perceived as politically damaging.
His campaign insisted that the edits were merely corrections of factual distortions.
Okay.
But the timing and the nature of the changes certainly raised eyebrows.
Yeah.
It created a perception of secrecy and manipulation, which is never a good look for someone aspiring to public office.
And then there are the controversial statements he's made about major historical events.
Oh, like what?
He suggested that the January 6th attack on the Capitol was an inside job, and even questioned whether federal agents were on the planes during the 9/11 attacks.
These are serious allegations, and it's important to note that they're not supported by any credible evidence. In fact, they've been widely debunked by experts and official investigations.
It's concerning that he would repeat such baseless claims, especially given his platform and his potential influence on public opinion.
Yeah.
It suggests a disregard for facts and a willingness to exploit people's fears and anxieties for political gain.
It also aligns with a broader trend of misinformation and conspiracy theories that has unfortunately become increasingly prevalent in our political discourse.
It's a trend that undermines trust in institutions and erodes our shared understanding of reality.
Precisely. It makes it difficult to have meaningful conversations about important issues when people are operating from different sets of facts.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored Vivek Ramaswamy's background, his business ventures, his political ambitions, and his propensity for controversy. It's clear that he's a complex and contradictory figure, someone who defies easy categorization.
He's a fascinating study in ambition, opportunism, and the allure of political power.
And now he's hinting at a return to his Ohio roots, potentially setting his sights on the governor's mansion in 2026. But the question remains, can he reinvent himself as a viable candidate for statewide office? Can he appeal to a broad enough base of voters to win in a state as politically diverse as Ohio?
Those are the questions we'll be exploring in more depth as we continue our deep dive into the world of Vivek Ramaswamy. Stay tuned. You know, it's interesting to consider how his business background might shape his approach to governing if he does run for governor. Would he bring that same CEO mentality to public office, focusing on efficiency and data-driven solutions?
That's a great point. It would be fascinating to see how his experience in the private sector, both the successes and the failures, would inform his decisions as a political leader. Some might argue that a fresh perspective, someone who isn't entrenched in the traditional ways of doing things, could be just what Ohio needs.
Perhaps. But there is a big difference between running a business and running a state.
Right.
Government involves navigating complex social and economic issues, balancing the needs of diverse constituencies, and working within a framework of laws and regulations.
Sure.
It's not always as simple as maximizing profits or streamlining operations.
And it's not just about management skills, is it? It's also about understanding the nuances of public policy and the art of compromise.
Right.
He would need to build relationships with legislators, work across the aisle, and find common ground on issues that often divide people along ideological lines.
Exactly. And let's not forget the importance of public perception.
Yeah.
He's cultivated this image as a disruptor, someone who's not afraid to challenge the status quo. But how will that play out in the context of Ohio politics? Will it be seen as refreshing or reckless?
It's a fine line to walk, isn't it? Especially when you consider some of the more controversial aspects of his past, with his tendency to spread misinformation and make unsubstantiated claims. Those sorts of things might fly in the world of business, but they can be major liabilities in politics.
Absolutely. And it's not just about past statements, it's also about his policy positions.
Yeah.
Some of his views, particularly on foreign policy, are quite unorthodox and could alienate voters who are accustomed to more traditional Republican positions.
Let's dive into that a bit. His stance on the Russo-Ukrainian war, for example, is pretty far outside the mainstream.
Okay.
He's talked about making major concessions to Russia to end the conflict, including freezing the current lines of control and ending U.S. military aid to Ukraine.
It's a position that aligns with a small but vocal faction within the Republican Party, but it's likely to be met with strong opposition from those who see Russia as a threat to global stability and who believe that the U.S. has a moral obligation to support Ukraine's defense.
It's also worth mentioning his stance on Taiwan.
Okay.
He said that the U.S. shouldn't defend Taiwan from a Chinese attack after we achieve semiconductor independence, which he aims for by 2028.
That's a pretty bold statement and one that could have major geopolitical consequences. It suggests a willingness to abandon a long-standing ally and potentially embolden China's ambitions in the region.
And then there's his take on climate change, which has drawn a lot of criticism.
Oh, really?
He's called the climate change agenda a hoax, which puts him at odds with the scientific consensus on the issue.
And yet he's also said that he's not a climate change denier and that he accepts that burning fossil fuels contributes to climate change.
It's a bit of a head-scratcher, isn't it? It makes you wonder if he's trying to play both sides of the issue, appealing to those who believe climate change is a serious threat, while also catering to those who dismiss it as a liberal conspiracy.
It's a strategy that could backfire, especially if voters perceive him as insincere or lacking a clear understanding of the issue.
And speaking of appealing to different audiences, his anti-woke rhetoric seems to be a deliberate attempt to tap into a sense of cultural anxiety and grievance that's prevalent among a segment of the population.
Yes, and it's a strategy that's been used effectively by other political figures, particularly those on the right.
Right.
It involves framing issues in a way that pits ordinary Americans against a perceived elite who are seen as out of touch with their values and concerns.
It's a way of simplifying complex issues and creating an us versus them dynamic that can be very powerful in mobilizing support.
But it can also be divisive and inflammatory. And it's not always clear what concrete policy solutions are being proposed beyond vague promises to restore common sense or protect traditional values.
So we have this complex figure, a successful entrepreneur, a political outsider, a controversial figure who's not afraid to challenge the status quo, and someone with a penchant for making provocative statements. How might all of this translate into a potential governorship in Ohio?
It's a fascinating question. He would certainly bring a unique set of experiences and perspectives to the role, but whether those experiences would be an asset or a liability remains to be seen.
His business acumen could be valuable in managing the state's finances and promoting economic growth. And his national profile and connections could attract attention and resources to Ohio.
But his controversial statements and unorthodox policy positions could also alienate moderate voters and create unnecessary conflict.
He would need to walk a fine line balancing his desire to shake things up with the need to build consensus and govern effectively.
And he would be entering a political landscape that's already quite polarized. Ohio has become a key swing state in recent years, reflecting the broader divisions within the country.
So he would need to figure out how to appeal to a diverse electorate, one that includes urban and rural voters, conservatives and liberals, those who embrace change and those who resist it.
It would be a significant challenge, but it's one that he seems eager to embrace. He's clearly ambitious and not afraid of a fight.
But ambition alone isn't enough to win elections. He would need to articulate a clear vision for the state, one that resonates with voters' concerns and aspirations.
And he would need to demonstrate that he's more than just a provocateur, that he has the temperament and the judgment to lead effectively.
It's a tall order, but it would certainly make for a fascinating race to watch.
Absolutely. And it would be interesting to see how his anti-woke agenda would play out at the state level. What specific policies would he prioritize? How would he approach issues like education, healthcare, and social welfare?
Those are all crucial questions, and the answers would reveal a lot about his governing philosophy and his understanding of the challenges facing Ohioans.
For example, would he attempt to implement policies that restrict access to abortion or limit LGBTQ+ rights? Would he cut funding for public education or social safety net programs?
These are the kinds of issues that would likely define his campaign and his potential governorship, and they would force voters to grapple with fundamental questions about the role of government and the direction of the state.
It would be a test not just of his leadership abilities, but also of the values and priorities of the Ohio electorate.
And, as we've seen throughout his career, Vivek Ramaswamy is not one to shy away from a challenge.
No, he isn't. He thrives on disruption and relishes the opportunity to upend expectations.
So if he does decide to run for governor in 2026, buckle up, Ohio. It's going to be a wild ride.
Indeed. But let's not forget that he's not the only player in this game. He would be facing off against seasoned politicians with deep roots in Ohio and a strong understanding of the state's political landscape.
That's right. It wouldn't be a cakewalk for him. He would need to build a coalition of support, raise significant funds, and navigate the complexities of a statewide campaign.
And he would need to convince voters that he's more than just a flash in the pan, that he has the substance and the staying power to be an effective leader.
It's a tall order, but it's one that he seems determined to fulfill. He clearly believes that he has something unique to offer, a vision for a different kind of politics, one that's rooted in his anti-woke ideology and his belief that America is in need of a cultural and political realignment.
Whether that vision resonates with Ohio voters remains to be seen, but one thing's for sure. He's a force to be reckoned with, and his potential entry into the governor's race would inject a new level of energy and unpredictability into Ohio politics.
It would be a political drama worth watching, and it would offer valuable insights into the shifting dynamics of American politics and the forces shaping our collective future.
It would be a reminder that politics is not just about policies and platforms, it's also about personalities and the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and where we're headed as a nation.
Well said. And as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Vivek Ramaswamy, it's clear that he's more than just a name on a ballot. He's a symbol of our times, a reflection of the anxieties and aspirations that are shaping our political landscape.
He's a reminder that the future is not predetermined, that it's shaped by the choices we make and the stories we choose to believe.
We spent this deep dive exploring the multifaceted journey of Vivek Ramaswamy, from biotech innovator to presidential hopeful to potential Ohio governor. He's a man who seems to defy easy categorization, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. He's a fascinating mix of contradictions.
Yeah.
The anti-woke advocate who previously championed DEI initiatives.
Right.
The political outsider with a knack for grabbing headlines. And the businessman who's not afraid to take risks, even when those risks result in spectacular failures. It's this blend of ambition, controversy, and unpredictability that makes him such a compelling figure.
It certainly does. But as we shift our focus to his potential impact on Ohio, I keep coming back to this question: what kind of leader might he be if he actually wins the governorship?
It's the million-dollar coin, isn't it? And while the sources we have don't offer a crystal ball,
Right.
they do provide some intriguing clues.
Okay.
His background in business, for instance, suggests a focus on efficiency, measurable results, and a data-driven approach to problem-solving.
Which on the surface could be a positive thing, right?
Yeah.
Bringing a fresh perspective and a results-oriented mindset to the often cumbersome world of government bureaucracy.
Potentially. But it's crucial to remember that governing a state is a vastly different beast than running a company. It requires a deep understanding of complex social and economic issues, the ability to balance the needs of diverse constituencies, and a willingness to navigate the often messy world of politics and compromise. It's not always about the bottom line or finding the most expedient solution.
That's a crucial distinction.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder how his anti-woke rhetoric, which has been such a prominent part of his messaging, would actually translate into tangible policies at the state level. What concrete changes might he push for in Ohio?
That's something Ohio voters would need to examine closely.
Yeah.
Would his agenda primarily focus on shrinking government, slashing regulations, and promoting what he sees as traditional values? Or would it involve more culture war tactics, zeroing in on hot-button issues and potentially exacerbating existing divisions within the state?
It's a question of both style and substance. And it makes me wonder how he would address the very real economic challenges facing many Ohioans, concerns about jobs, healthcare, education, and the rising cost of living. Would his solutions lean more towards individual responsibility or government intervention?
Those are fundamental questions.
They are.
And his answers would reveal a lot about his governing philosophy and whether he truly understands the needs of Ohioans from all walks of life.
Right?
Remember, Ohio is a swing state, a microcosm of the nation as a whole, with a diverse mix of urban and rural voters,
Right.
conservative and liberal viewpoints.
For sure.
He can't afford to simply appeal to one segment of the population if he wants to win statewide office.
He'd need to build bridges, find common ground, and demonstrate that he's capable of representing the interests of all Ohioans, not just those who align with his ideology. It would require a level of nuance and political savvy that we haven't necessarily seen from him thus far.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder how he would tailor his message to appeal to a broader audience.
Yeah.
Would he emphasize his Ohio roots, his connection to Trump, his business success? Or would he attempt to moderate his image, downplaying the more controversial aspects of his past?
It's a delicate balancing act.
Yeah.
And it raises another question that's been lingering in my mind throughout this deep dive. Will he actually follow through and run for governor in 2026? Or is this just another attention-grabbing maneuver from a man who seems to thrive on keeping everyone guessing?
Only time will tell, of course. But one thing is certain, the political landscape in Ohio is in flux, and Vivek Ramaswamy, with all his complexities and contradictions, could be a major force to contend with. His potential candidacy would inject a level of unpredictability and excitement into the race, forcing voters to confront fundamental questions about the direction of the state and the kind of leadership they desire.
It would be a fascinating political drama to witness, and it would offer valuable insights into the shifting dynamics of American politics, the forces shaping our collective future, the anxieties and aspirations that are fueling our political discourse, and the enduring power of narrative in shaping our perceptions of ourselves and the world around us.
Well said. And I think this deep dive has underscored a crucial point. Politics is not just about policies and platforms.
Right.
It's also about personalities and the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and where we're headed as a nation.
It's about ambition, power, and the relentless pursuit of influence. And in the case of Vivek Ramaswamy, it's about a man who seems determined to write his own story, even if it means rewriting the rules along the way.
It's a story that's still unfolding, full of twists and turns, and we'll be watching closely to see what the next chapter holds.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, we invite you, our listener, to consider the same question we've been grappling with throughout this episode. What does the rise of Vivek Ramaswamy tell us about the state of American politics? What are the implications of his potential ascent to power, and what does it mean for the future of Ohio, and perhaps even the nation as a whole?
These are questions worth pondering, and we encourage you to continue exploring them long after this episode ends, because ultimately, the answers lie not just in the hands of politicians like Vivek Ramaswamy, but in the choices we make as citizens, the stories we choose to believe, and the future we collectively choose to create.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the complex world of Vivek Ramaswamy. We hope this exploration has provided you with valuable insights and sparked your own curiosity about the forces shaping our political landscape.
Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.
That's it for the deep dive. Catch you next time.